you, Prometheus, my favorite cousin.
What's up, guys? Veteran Gamer here. And do you guys ever remember the game called Gods and Monsters?
Of love.
Well, if you don't, that's because the game went through a name change due to a potential legal dispute with Monsters Energy Drink. So what we have today is Immortal's Fenyx Rising. This game, which is a single-player, narrative-driven title, is set in the ancient mythology of Greece. Throughout your campaign, you will be narrated by Zeus and Prometheus through in-game cutscenes as well as just overall narration through your gameplay. Once you're past through the initial introduction, you enter the game's character creation. This tool is not the most in-depth tool that I've seen, but it's also not the most shallow. There's enough permutations to make your character unique and your own. However, every character shares the name Fenyx regardless if you make a male or female character. The character creation is decent, I would say overall. It's quite user friendly. It's not hard to use, but the permutations aren't as in depth as you would say as a game like Demon Souls, where Demon Souls had a lot more permutations. This one's far more limiting, but given that this game is catered towards a younger audiences, it's actually not a bad tool, and I thought it was pretty decent. Not the best, not the worst, but definitely it's there, and is enough for you to make your own Fenyx your own character. Once your character is created, now you get into the actual game itself. Once you take one look at this game, there is one clear inspiration that comes to mind, and that is Zelda Breath of the Wild. And quite frankly, that is a perfect game to compare this to, as the similarities between this and Breath of the Wild, it's ridiculous. They are very similar, and that's not a bad thing by any means. Breath of the Wild is a fantastic game, and it's clear that Ubisoft took their inspiration from Zelda Breath of the Wild with a little bit sprinkle of Assassin's Creed. I say Assassin's Creed because much like Assassin's Creed, there is towers that you have to climb, in which once you climb the tower, you reach the top, you do your 360 pan, and the map reveals for that section. That is very Assassin's Creed like. As well as once you're on top of like a tower, it is recommended that you enter your scope mode where you can sit there and tag items in the distance as basically adding waypoints to the map. This will allow you to track things like where treasure chests are, dungeons, rare items, all sorts of things. You go around, you start highlighting them, and you literally light up your map filled with waypoints and things to explore and see. Once you're past all that, the other inspiration that comes from Zelda Breath of the Wild is the game's dungeons. This game has many, many dungeons. You enter a dungeon, and you have to go through it, solve a puzzle, and then maybe you fight a boss, maybe you don't fight a boss. This is exactly like Zelda Breath of the Wild. The only downside to this, at least for Immortals, for me, in my opinion, is that every dungeon, for the most part, I would say about 90% of them, have puzzles to be solved. Due to the amount of puzzles that are in this game, depending on how you feel about like platform puzzles and things like that, depends on how you will respond to the game. To me personally, I don't mind some puzzles, like a puzzle here, a puzzle there, kind of like Uncharted or Tomb Raider, where there is some, but it's not it's not very frequently. This game, there is just a lot of puzzles, and to the point where, to me, it dragged the game down for me. There were a lot of times where I'm just like, really, another puzzle, and it drags the game for me personally, because every other aspect, the exploration, the traversal, the combat of the game is fantastic. It's just, for me, again, this is just my opinion, it's a divisive opinion, but I was a fan of the overly abundance of puzzles. I wish the game had less puzzles to do and more action, because quite frankly, I love the combat system. But that's just me, it's each to their own. Some people will have no issues with the puzzles. To me, I just thought there was just one too many of them. As you progress through the game, eventually you'll reach the Hall of the Gods. The Hall of the Gods is like your central hub. This is where you upgrade Fenyx, you add more abilities, you talk to the gods that you freed. This is basically where you'll do everything you need to do to make Fenyx more powerful. And that's the thing. That's a good theme about the game, is that the more powerful Phoenix becomes, the more fun the game gets. So it's really recommended that you do side stuff, you do go the extra mile, find the extra upgrades, make Phoenix more powerful, because it really does a good job of making you feel overpowered as you learn more and more abilities. I mentioned how the Hall of the Gods is also a location where you interact with the gods. In Immortals Fenyx Rising, there are four gods that you have to free throughout the game's main story. Each god represents a tower in the world, which is again a resemblance of that Assassin's Creed-like gameplay, where you have to go to a tower, climb the tower, reveal that area. Each one is representative of a god. The good news is that each section of the map is also a representation of the god itself. Case in point, Aphrodite's world is more colorful and cozy, I guess, if you will, because she's the goddess of love. It resembles her. Where if you go to Ares' area, everything is more battered, destroyed. It looked like there was a war there, but again, that resembles the god of war. So the issue with I had with this gameplay loop is that when you go to free any given god, you go there, go to climb the tower, reveal the map, find the god. The god will give you 3 quests, one at a time. Each quest is exactly the same. You go to an area, enter a dungeon, solve a puzzle, get the item, go back to the god. Then the god will send you to another area, another dungeon, another puzzle, rinse and repeat. And this is where the game gets repetitive because there are 4 gods, each god with 3 quests that you have to do. Each quest has a puzzle to be solved within a dungeon. It is very repetitive. It got repetitive very, very quickly. And it's one of the bigger downsides I find to Immortals Fenyx Rising. And it's just a shame because traversing the world, whether you're flying with your wings, using a mount, it's fun to traverse the world. The worlds themselves are beautiful. The graphics are incredible. It's just a shame that the gameplay loop overall is very repetitive. One of the more redeeming qualities with Immortals Fenyx Rising is the boss battles. I mentioned earlier in this video, in this review, that the combat was really good. And when you go into a boss battle, it accentuates that gameplay even more. The boss battles are diverse, they're fun, they're challenging. I mean, for a game that is catered towards a younger audience, there were some pretty tough boss battles, and what, I'm all welcome for it. I played the Souls games, and this combat loop, it's more in depth than what you would see in Zelda Breath of the Wild, and more like Assassin's Creed. But the mix between the two, it's a very fine line of a mix, but the mix itself is really, really good. I loved it. Like I said, I just wish there was more boss fights to have. And I don't want to show too much for spoiler reasons, but some of the boss battles are just incredible. And quite frankly, I'm just going to let this gameplay play out a little bit, and you guys can see for yourself just how interesting some of the boss battles can be. But be mindful, this is one of the earlier boss battles that you're seeing.
I deserved better than his besters.
Not fair. He kind of held me hostage, which was pretty impressive. I thought, this guy is sun material.
He was already the sun.
Well, that was the only moment he lived up to it.
lastly, the one of the things I want to talk about is performance. So running on the PlayStation 5, Immortals Fenyx Rising actually has just two performance modes, Fidelity and Performance. As you saw throughout the gameplay, the first half was in Fidelity, the second half was in Performance. To be honest, the Fidelity mode is might as well not even be there. Like, the only difference is a resolution bump as well as some enhancements to the particle effects, but none of which warrants like giving up 60 frames per second. And quite frankly, the fidelity mode is borderline irrelevant to me, at least in my opinion, and that everyone should just play this game in the performance mode. But the one thing I do want to accentuate, and this is more so because of Ubisoft's track record when it comes to optimization, especially games at launch. Immortals of Fenyx Rising is probably the most optimized Ubisoft title that I've ever played. I mean, I encountered no bugs of any kind. There was no glitches, no issues, no technical issues of any kind. The game ran flawlessly, and I was actually impressed by this, given that, as I said, Ubisoft does not necessarily have the greatest track record when it comes to in-game performance, especially at launch. You know, we all know some of their other titles are buggy or missing features that were promised, and they come later on. But with Immortals, I actually felt like this package was complete. It was ready to go. The game was very well polished, and it's definitely worth noting, and kudos to the developers for releasing what I would call a finished product. But in all, what does this mean for Immortals? Well, Immortals has a great graphical art style. It takes a lot of inspiration from Zelda Breath of the Wild, as I mentioned. The combat is really good. The story is actually very surprising. I'm not going to say much about it, but just know that there is some unexpected surprises within the story that really make it interesting, and I look forward to the extra content that will be coming to Immortals in the future. The overall gameplay loop, overall, it was fun. I did have a problem with the overly abundance of puzzles, as well as the initial repetitive loop of freeing a god, doing the 3 quests, and doing it like 4 times in total. Once you got past that part, that's where the game really gets interesting after all the gods are freed. But like during that section, it weighed the game down, as well as the puzzles. And again, this is just in my opinion. But I liked it. I enjoyed my time with Immortals. I love the visuals. I'm excited for what's to come with the season pass and other content that's going to be added. Overall, this is a game that I would recommend to anyone who has never played Breath of the Wild and was always wanted to. This is a very good substitute. If you're looking for an open world fun game that's not overly complicated and that's just overall fun, yeah, I would recommend Immortals Fenyx Rising. There is a very prominent humor aspect to it. Obviously, humor can be very subjective to the person. I loved it. I don't want to say or show anything of Guardians of the humor because I don't want to ruin the fun. But there was a lot of moments where the humor is matured. Like, you got to read between the lines, and it's fun. I like the humor. Overall, I give Immortals Fenyx Rising an 8.5 out of 10.